You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder, and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Well, hey there. Welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I am your host, Steve Hutt. Thanks for tuning in today. Today we're going to dive into, I'm going to call it one of the biggest challenges really that are facing a lot of Shopify merchants right now. And I think it's building a marketing system that, actually works together instead of kind of fighting against itself, so to speak. I really keep hearing a lot from merchants. They're a little bit frustrated because, they're doing a lot of things in silos. Think about like Facebook ads, they're sending emails, maybe they're doing Google ads, they're posting on social. But I feel, and I think they feel that there's a lot of separate campaigns that are running a lot of times by different team members. They don't really talk or kind of coexist together. And I think that's interestingly odd to me because I think, the Facebook person isn't talking to the email person and the creative team is making ads in a vacuum almost. I think it's really interesting that sort of thing is happening. And I think the residual effect of this is that acquisition costs keep rising. And I think lifetime value a lot of times is just staying flat even after all of this work. And I think even worse, I think right now is when you think about all the iOS changes that have happened, all these tracking and attribution challenges that have been it's almost impossible, other than maybe with some third-party pixel tracking tools, it's really almost impossible to understand which channels are actually driving the best results. I think this silly blended ROAS thing that's been floated around, pretty crazy. And so that's why I have my guest on today. His name is Bobby. He's the co-founder and CEO of a company called Lilo Social. And it's interesting about this company is that they're managing over, so they're eating their own dog food here. They're managing over $100 million in ad spend. I think they've been on, I did a tiny bit of research before recording today, but they've been on the Inc. 5000 list kind of 2 years running. Even Bobby himself has been named on the Forbes 30 under 30. So he's the real deal. And I think what I found interesting, what really caught my attention is that near and dear to my heart, his company is a Klaviyo kind of master elite agency. And, there's, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 partners kind of in the Klaviyo email SMS world. And now they have this whole marketing platform now. They're in the top 0.2%. So clearly they understand how to execute at the toppest level, the best level possible. And so it's really cool. I'm really hoping I'm going to learn a lot about, there's some grumblings about their full funnel approach. And I think all these disparate systems and duct tape going on, it's just really crazy. And I think Bobby has really solved a lot of that for a lot of brands. So, hi, Bobby. Welcome to E-commerce Fastlane.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. An incredible intro. Well, I'm excited to chat. I think you hit the nail on the head on kind of our core thesis of, D2C in 2025 and beyond is really about making sure that all systems are kind of rowing in the direction. And, that's our full funnel approach is making sure that all of the marketing channels and efforts are, kind of cohesively moving in the same direction. I think, just a little bit of background here. We started in 2016 as a Facebook ads agency only. And at that time, it was incredibly easy if you knew what you were doing in Facebook to acquire customers. And it's evolved a lot since then. And we've been forced to change many, many times, throughout these, 8 to 10 years that we've been running Facebook ads for to, serve D2C brands and what they need at this current stage to be successful and most importantly, be profitable.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting though, I think, and as I mentioned at the top of the show here, I feel that a lot of merchants feel a little bit that their marketing is a little bit of a duct tape and a little bit of a prayer, to be honest with you. And I think, with all these different people running all the different channels, I think the attribution is quite messy. And I think that's where you guys have kind of at least put a label on it saying, no, we're all about this full funnel growth. Can you talk maybe in practice, how do you know it's working? What's actually going on when you say full funnel growth? And because I just think there's a lot of chaos going on right now. And I think you kind of distilled distilled it down into a process that's actually working.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, when we think of full funnel growth, like primarily that's anything that's needed to acquire and retain new customers kind of across the board. And, I think the landscape has, kind of continued to evolve and to your point, got more and more messy in terms of attribution and things like that. I think one of the things that has really, kind of grounded us is, aligning on business metrics rather than like in-platform reporting and things like that. So if for all of our clients, we're kind of understanding what their growth goals are and how that relates back to, financials as well. I think that's one thing that, over the last 3 years, kind of coming out of the pandemic and into kind of a different era of e-commerce that, has forced all marketers and agencies and brands to get a little bit more honed in on is like, what are the financials that make this business successful and how do we get it to profitability, which, I think is a big focus for us is like profitable growth. So, I think what we see a lot is brands need a little bit of help kind of understanding their metrics. What are the metrics that we should really care about, right? And, sometimes we talk to brands and they're like, hey, we need to be at a 3x ROAS. And that's actually what's stunting their growth is, not having a core understanding of, okay, what are the metrics that really matter, and how are we measuring that, kind of across the board. And sometimes lowering ROAS goals or, increasing spend in certain areas can actually, fuel more profitable growth, right? And kind of grow beyond, certain stages and things like that from that perspective. So that's one thing that, we've really aligned on is like, okay, what is the North Star KPI for these brands? And each brand has a different goal depending on funding and overall goals and things like that, whether it's first order profitable, 90-day payback period, some aggressive goals of 6-month payback period on new customers and things like that, but really trying to stoke the fire in terms of, growth and what that engine really looks like in terms of how does paid media, email, landing page, offer, how do you get them kind of rowing in the same direction when it's offer, touch points, so on and so forth in that regard.
Yeah. It's amazing. One thing I did a tiny bit of research and I've learned a thing about your team's philosophy a bit. And part of it is that like creative is kind of what drives performance, is kind of what I've learned from your company and just doing some reading. But here's kind of what I'm seeing, to be quite honest with you. I think that a lot of merchants are either copying their competitors' ads or they're just like, throwing stuff at the wall and see if the spaghetti sticks, so to speak. Like, can you kind of walk us through a bit about what your like actual like creative development process actually is? Because I the reason I'm asking this question is because, there's a lot of people that think about, well, should we do customer research? And then how many ads do we have to make? And then can we share ads from within different networks and platforms? If you're winning on one network, is it okay to put the same ad in another network? And so I just would like to understand overall, like just the whole creative process you have, and you kind of walk us through just so I'm kind of getting an idea here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find other agencies, brands, marketers, and DTC today that won't tell you that, creative is 90% of the battle when it comes to these ad platforms, specifically Meta, when, that's where 90% of the ad spend for most brands is anyways. Like creative is the most important. I think everyone has learned to kind of regurgitate that over the last, 6 to 12 months. But I think what happened is people got lost in like what actually makes a good creative. And, people will see a brand that, either is doing well or they believe is doing well. They'll find an ad in the ad library and be like, oh, this brand is crushing it. They have this review ad. We're going to, copy this.
Make a review ad. Yeah.
and recreate it for us. And then they launch it and it doesn't work. And I think what they, miss in that is that it isn't about the template and how the review is laid out. It's kind of the emotional triggers that the review hits. And those brands that are doing really well, doing a really, really good job of understanding what makes people buy and worry about kind of the format later. And I think, some of our biggest unlocks and biggest wins on creative have come from really doing the research on, competitors, review analysis, ad comment analysis, kind of defining those as pillars in terms of, okay, people are, buying us for immunity support or inflammation support. And then once we have kind of those pillars, then it's kind of translated into, okay, what's the format of the ad that's the best way to kind of convey say that. I think you see a lot of brands struggle because they're, throwing 30 to 50 creative in the ad account every month, maybe even every week, and nothing sticking. And they think that they can brute force their way beyond that into success with like, we just need more ads. We just need more ads. But the messaging is really what comes first. To us, there's really two components. It's messaging and offer, and then creative execution, is a close third in that regard. But it really starts with the creative research, making sure that we're understanding, okay, what are we tapping into that's, going to move the needle here kind of across the board.
Right. And so that would be, I guess, almost like a briefing then. I guess you have some kind of a creative brief. You have an idea after you do like competitive analysis, but then there's a creative step that has to go through and that we have to kind of pause, not just all of a sudden run into production.
Yeah, exactly. We're kind of building those pillars or those hypotheses of, we want to focus this supplement on kind of immunity support for moms with young kids. And, we pulled that from like ad comments of like, hey, I was getting sick, every other week and, started taking this supplement and this improved this. And it's like, okay, that's a hypothesis. That's an angle that we're going to tap into. Do some more research, kind of build out kind of that hypothesis or brief and complete. And then it's like, okay, here's how this translates into 6 to 10 different ads that can kind of be grouped together. They all look a little bit different, but they follow the same format, which I think is, or not the same format, but they follow the same, overall messaging theme. And that might be 2 carousels, 2 statics, a review ad, a high polished video ad, and then a UGC ad, right? So you've got 6 or 7 different ads that look very different in practice, but the messaging is consistent, right? And that allows us to tap into different audiences. And, reason being is Meta has put a ton of resources into getting the right ad to the right people. When we started in 2016, it was very much like if you wanted to target moms with kids under 2 that shop Starbucks, you would go in and say this interest and this and this and this age, right? And the platform has really moved away from that where, 70 to 95% of our spend has quote unquote no targeting. It doesn't mean that we're serving ads to everyone. It just means that the creative is really doing the targeting. So if you want to reach that, mom with a young kid that shops at Starbucks, focus on how to speak to that person through creative, and Facebook will go and find that person.
I see. So how does AI fit into this mix? Because the reason I ask is that because I feel that, and I've had a few of these platforms kind of on the show, but since you're executing, at a really high level, there's obviously, usually it's like AI assisted versus like fully just having AI dynamically create ads and things like that. So I just want to understand like first of all, your mindset around the use of AI and is it helping you go to market quicker? Is it helping you find winning creative? Or is there still like more of a human element along with your briefs and all the different things, the process and the pillars that you talked about? Is there a place for AI to fit now into this world? And is that a competitive moat that people can have because they're using it? I'm not sure. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. You asked me 6 months ago, it's a different answer. And if you ask me 6 months from now, it'll be a much different answer too. I think that, it's certainly here and it's certainly a competitive advantage. I think every brand's trying to figure out what that looks like. You kind of sort through the mud of who's over-promising because they're selling something, right? And I think, there is not a platform right now that, takes and creates winning ads and ships them for you, automatically and just prints cash while you sit on a beach, right? I know some platforms are trying to sell that, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that AI has helped, us execute at a higher level, a faster level, and it's becoming an advantage for brands that want to lean into it rather than shy away from it. And it takes shape in a lot of different ways in terms of, like one thing that we do for competitor and, kind of just brand research is like, we'll go and scrape, reviews, we'll export ad comments on, a brand's Facebook ads and, upload those into an LLM and, pull different themes and say, okay, a lot of people are, hesitant because of X, Y, and Z. How do we kind of reinforce that on the landing page, right? Something that totally could have been done 12 months ago, but would have taken hours of time, kind of sorting, categorizing them. That's now done in, 3 minutes. And obviously you got to fact check it and things like that. But, just some of these insights become a lot easier to find quickly, and the pattern recognition is getting a lot better in terms of, okay, you have 42 people that said that, they're using this product to help them with acne. And it's like, okay, that's an angle that we haven't explored yet. Let's go with that. I think the creative stuff is moving a lot faster. Brands that have come to us with very minimal, creative resources and creative assets, we're able to take, and it depends a bit on the product. Some are better than others, but, supplement pills or something like that. Like, we can go and create images that, would have costed a brand $2,000 to $5,000 to do a shoot for, and you can get a lot more assets and run faster. So I think the moat is really speed and volume, that we're seeing with AI. And I think it's changing rapidly. And I think we're trying to, continue to cut through on what's actually impactful. There's a lot of things out there now that we're seeing that look great, and it's like super impressive, but does it make you more money, and does it make you more effective is, the thing that we're helping brands kind of sort through from that perspective. So that's where where we're at. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great things that you can do. I think even on the video creation, we have a few brands that we've created these AI, hooks where it's like this really visual AI creative at the first 3 seconds that is just capturing a ton of attention on the platform. And, the last thing I'll say on the video creation, I think one thing that we believe as an agency is we're seeing a lot of people that are trying to make AI look as real as possible. And for some brands, we've gone in the exact opposite direction, where we try to make it as fabricated as possible. And it's like, holy shit, when this shows up in the feed, it's like, this is crazy, and it gets a lot of attention, rather than like this influencer that looks real. It's like, okay, if it looks real, it's just going to blend in with everything. So, we've had a lot of fun with some briefs of, golf balls opening up and, exploding off the tee and things like that, and turning into a rocket or something along those lines, that there's no way it's real, but it's visually stunning, and it gets people to pay attention within the feed, which is, essentially what we're all trying to do.
Yeah, the whole thumb stopping thing. I know that I read somewhere recently about just TikTok in general, kind of like just how incredible that platform is, and now with it connected to Shopify and being able to buy from within the app. But it really is all about, and people trust, the Gen Zs just trust TikTok, and the revenue is just going through the roof. But part of it is like, how do you get something that's thumb stopping? And you're right, maybe not making it look so realistic actually is more impactful, that they're going to stop. Like they're, and I've even noticed even recently, it's more of a side note, I even see Pinterest has now added something where they're saying like AI enhanced is now a tiny label in the corner now on images. And so it's interesting. I know we're in the Wild West right now trying to figure out how we fit from, an ad creative and just like a marketing perspective, right? It's so interesting what's out there and what's happening. And I think people are testing the waters. You clearly have too, by making it look extra like vivid and clearly fake, but they stop and like, if you have the right music and the right, the right graphics on it, text overlays and stuff, all of a sudden, wow, okay, what's this all about? So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's the Wild West. And, I think that it will be a moat. I think it'll be a moat in a lot of different ways. But I think there's the one thing that we see is like some brands are shying away from like, hey, we don't want to use AI in any capacity. And I think what's going to happen is the brands that do will run a lot faster. And there's certainly a speed of execution that's a huge advantage as well in that regard.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a bit about attribution now. I mentioned at the top of the show, but I think merchants it's another area that I believe they're struggling in, because you've got, paid media, you've got email, SMS, you got organic. Essentially, you're touching the same customer. And so how do you actually measure what's working? Like, is there like an attribution modeling that you have, or a tool? I guess my main reason for asking this question is because I could see it being a challenge of how channels can kind of cannibalize each other, and we kind of want to double down on what is working. So I just would love your feedback about what the operational flow is and process from an attribution perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a fundamental challenge with attribution is that all of these ad, like two things. One, the platforms will tell you that they're making you rich, right? If you can line your Google ads revenue, your Meta revenue, and your Klaviyo revenue, it's, 5x what you're seeing in Shopify, right? So, and that's fair, right? Like you talk to anyone who has made a purchase and like, oh, I saw an influencer post on it, then I got an ad, then I Googled the brand, then I got an abandoned cart email, right? So they're not lying about, hey, I did play a role in this. The question is like, what role did they play in it? And there's a lot of attribution platforms, Triple Whale, Northbeam, and things like that. I think the one fundamental challenge with, all attribution is Facebook and Google make a ton of money because they're really good at optimizing for your objectives, right? And if you're rowing against that and you're saying, hey, in this platform, we're seeing this ROAS on this ad compared to this, what we're seeing in Meta, you start making changes that don't optimize the algorithm, right? You're kind of rowing against them. So first and foremost, I think the one thing that we try to do is hold the platforms as accountable as possible when it comes to, what they can get credit for, right? So on Meta, really tight exclusions on existing customers, right? People who have purchased, we think that retention should happen through channels that you're not paying to continue to reach. So excluding all past purchasers. So that's a source that we see a lot of over attribution when it comes to Meta is like, if you're not excluding your past customers, they get a ton of credit for people who would have purchased and have purchased in the past. What is the attribution model, right? So on Meta, we're traditionally using 7-day click or 1-day click to view the performance of what we consider is actually incremental, right? There's a huge value difference between someone who saw an ad and purchased. If they didn't click on it, there's a good chance that they were already going to buy. So holding them accountable to only click-based attribution from that perspective, in that regard, and then having a single source of truth, back to the start of our conversation in terms of, what are the metrics that matter to us? What is our North Star? And, there's really two truths that you have is like what you're paying in ads and what's showing up in Shopify. Everything else in between that is a bridge to kind of understand how you got from spend to revenue and, trying to decipher that. I think it's important to make, decisions on a consistent basis. I think data can tell whatever story you want it to if you're not looking at it consistently, right? So I think the one thing that we preach internally and externally with brands and clients is we want to look at the same metrics the same way, day over day, week over week, month over month, right? And make sure that we're seeing how that's trending and what decisions are influencing that and, kind of so on and so forth in that regard.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the email side and SMS side. You being a kind of a Klaviyo, a master elite partner, I think it kind of puts you in a really unique position. What I see, and I just would love your feedback on it, is I think most merchants, unfortunately, they kind of treat email and SMS a little bit more like set it and forget it channels a little bit. They'll have the basic kind of like welcome series. They'll have an abandoned cart series of some sort. Like, what are you doing maybe differently that turns, I guess, the email and SMS truly into a growth driver for a business? And I think that obviously must give feedback to paid acquisition and stuff like that of how email or SMS is contributing to that. But I'm just curious, other than set it and forget it, which are the campaigns that are kind of pre-baked into the tool when you fire it up, what other things are you doing that you're finding very great success out of?
Yeah, I think, a lot of things there. I think that to your point, I think one of the big upsides that we see as an agency with email and SMS programs is they are ever evolving. And, the email team is providing feedback to the paid ads team on what's working from an offer perspective or what cohorts are coming in and so on and so forth. And then vice versa, the ads team is saying, hey, we're seeing this type of messaging work really well. Let's update our welcome series with this, right? I think, the one thing that, back to the attribution of like, hey, you saw an influencer, you saw an ad, and you Googled it, you got an abandoned cart email, first and foremost, making sure that all of those touch points are consistent, within reason, still reaching the customer where they are and what messaging they need at that point, changes from touch point to touch point. But you should know that it's, an X, Y, and Z product selling you X, Y, and Z benefit at kind of each step of the way there. And, we spend a lot of time testing, within email. I think one thing that email allows for us to do is there's a constant flow of data coming through where we can run A/B tests. I think one of the the biggest challenges that we see when we audit brands is they have flows that have been set up and no real test is being run. And, in all of our flows, there's A/B tests, whether it's subject line, content length, images, so on and so forth, and continuing to test in that regard. I also think back to kind of the touch points and kind of that main North Star KPI is holding email accountable too for what revenue it is driving. And, if a brand is struggling, it's July 22nd and, we're pacing 6% behind on where we thought we would be for revenue. What are the segments that we can tap into to, drive some incremental revenue with an offer or things like that as well. So, I think it's, a lot of the email, comes from the traffic that you're driving at top of funnel. But then what are you doing with those segments and how are you looking at the data and what offers and cadence and testing is happening from there as well is super, super important to us. It is very much not considered a set it and forget it channel for us as well.
That's good to hear. One thing I noticed too, there's a lot of merchants, I think, that unfortunately are still sending a lot of their traffic to either a product page or even worse, just to their homepage from their paid ads. When does it kind of make sense to start building kind of dedicated landing pages? I mean, I think we all know the benefits of it. I think the challenge is people just aren't doing it consistently. There's got to be specific elements that make them convert better for sure. But I'd like to hear it from your perspective. Is there a benefit in creating landing pages and why is that? And is there a framework that seems to work?
Yeah, for sure. I think it kind of goes back to the creative question too of, when are we, what pillars and things like that are we going after? So, for a brand that we were working with, there was kind of 3 pillars that we were going after, which was immunity, inflammation, and sleep, right? And it's really hard to do all of that well on a homepage or a homepage or a PDP, right? And, how do you kind of tailor it to kind of all 3 of those pillars where a landing page, you could kind of make one template and bring that across each of the pillars. So when you're clicking on an ad for inflammation, it goes to a landing page about inflammation, and same with immunity, right? So I think, once you kind of get a read on what pillars are going to resonate on the ad side of things, it makes sense to bring that messaging over to a landing page. I also think that it gives brands a lot more flexibility on what they're saying, right? Again, the homepage kind of needs to relate to all customers at all different facets, where landing pages give you a bit more control on, for us, 2 things is the messaging of that landing page and the offer, right? Some brands are pretty weary about running certain offers or gift with purchase across, the entire website or something along those lines, where a landing page, you can kind of, within reason, tailor who's seeing that offer and how they're getting that message. And I think that's become really impactful for us as well in terms of, landing pages. And this is another one back to kind of, creative, where I think people think landing pages work because they do. And they've heard that on podcasts or on Twitter or wherever, that like landing pages can increase your conversion rate. And they find a brand and they see that they're doing a hero, a review section, a value prop section, a shop section, and the FAQ section. And they, rip that template and make it for their brand and add their branding and images and copy. It's not the format. We spend very little time thinking about the UI of landing pages until kind of the final steps. It's, what's the research? What's the messaging and how are we speaking to that? How are we handling objectives? And then, what the sections end up looking like it's not going to make a huge impact on performance. And I would say, some people overcomplicate it and it ends up hurting them. They spend a lot more time thinking about the visual elements than they do the messaging. And I think that's where brands run into trouble and they say, hey, I tested, these landing pages and they didn't work. And, we're going to redesign this review section, but they use the same reviews that they were using in the page that didn't work. And, they're probably focusing their efforts on, the wrong areas and the wrong point of leverage, I would say.
It's actually a good segue because it's like I noticed on your site you have a service that's called Creative on Demand, and I'm sure we all know that there is this fatigue that can happen, and more. And I think just sometimes ads can run for months, but now sometimes they burn out literally in a week or even days. And so let's talk about that service you have, this Creative on Demand. Can you talk about, like, first of all, why is this available? Which I think is different than the full funnel approach that you have as an option too. But maybe based on a brand's current operational flow, that what they need is more creative, consistent creative, I guess. And so I'm curious about you offering this particular service, and I'd like to understand about some of the deliverables.
Yeah, for sure. So we believe firmly in full funnel growth and everything that we've chatted about, the last 30 minutes here. We don't necessarily, demand that brands do everything with us. We just demand that they're doing it all, right? So we have brands that, just work with us on creative or just on media buying. I think our obligation is that we want to be involved in, that process and guidance and things like that. But if you have a rock star team that's, doing your email, and like, all the power to you. We just want to be involved and kind of, still get those same learnings and that same partnership that we do when we do it full funnel. So, creative, we think about the same way. We want access to, how you're running the media and things like that, but we can provide a lot of insights and things like that from a creative perspective. And I think creative is the biggest point of leverage within an ad account. So that's, where we want to optimize from there as well.
I see. And then the other service you have is your retention service, I guess, building this kind of lifetime value. Is that all essentially through email and SMS, kind of list growth, these sort of things, like loyalty kind of programs?
Yeah, it's the largest part of it from a retention perspective, but I think we want to be, kind of a full retention partner, right? So how does that involve with your subscription program, your direct mail, analytics, shipping notifications and things like that? Everything that kind of goes into, the touch point of once they're in your CRM or once they've purchased, how are we kind of first getting them across the finish line to buy, and then how are we retaining them beyond? And I think email and I'd be remiss if I didn't say email and SMS was the largest component of that. But I think, we've spent a lot of time over the last 12 months building out what does that look like in practice, and how do we go a lot further, than just sending emails at certain times and things like that as well.
It's interesting too. I went and I was checking the site 200 case studies. You've worked with a lot of incredible brands. True Botanicals is one, and Mantra. Anyways, a whole gang here. And so is there any, without giving away some of the secret sauce and stuff of some of these brands you're working with, is there anyone that you could think of that maybe has been quite impactful? They came to you, they had a challenge, you kind of took them on as a client and, went through your full funnel approach, really helped them out. And then, like, what does great look like for them now that they've become a client of your company? I'm just curious, and you don't have to maybe call out the brand specifically unless there is a public case study about them, or if it's just more anecdotally, here's what we're seeing.
Yeah, we have one that we always go back to because I think everything kind of fell into place exactly how our thesis is. I'm working with a cherry juice brand, and came to us and was struggling to make DTC work, but had a booming retail business. And the reason that I'd love chatting about this case study in particular is everything that we talked about worked in tandem, to a T, right? We started with messaging testing. We did competitor research, customer review research. They even did a focus group. They came in with, kind of 3 core messaging principles. We tested value prop 1, value prop 2, value prop 3, got an initial read, was not at goal, but there was one of those pillars that was light years ahead of the other 2. We said, okay, we're going to go all in on that. Created a bunch of ads and a landing page that was specific to that pillar. And pretty much overnight, once we kind of got that lead, probably over the course of, a 3-week span from when we got that initial signal on the ads, cost per click dropped dramatically, conversion rate increased, significantly. It was like, okay, this is clearly the pillar that we're going to go all in on, to this day, continue with that messaging, continue with that, style of landing page and messaging and things like that as well. Brought it across email, all of our ads, influencers, things like that kind of follow that. It was just really the summation of, everything coming together at once. I've helped hundreds of brands in similar ways, but sometimes it's more of like, okay, we need to change this media buying approach. For this client specifically, it was everything kind of coming together at once, which is, kind of our end goal. So it's kind of my favorite one to kind of talk about.
Yeah, I'll throw that one up in the show notes for sure. Cherry Bundy, I think is the name of the brand, and it's pretty cool. And you're being very transparent on exactly what you did and the outcomes that happened. It's pretty impressive, and you're even showing a lot of the creative, both landing page, actual ads. And so I think there's some really good motivation here to say, hey, this worked for this particular business. And I love the different pillars because all the things you're talking about. One is they're talking about the sleep benefits. And, hey, I drank one of these nightly for 2 weeks and to see if it helped me with my sleep. And here's my results. I mean, it's really interesting and visually it's really compelling. It clearly has worked. And this is being published on third-party places too, like, well and good kind of like a website and not even an ad. It's actually being published somewhere else. It's so interesting and you're showing it all here. So kudos that you're being honest and transparent about kind of what is working and just motivate people that the opportunity is still there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love it. So what do you think kind of the next steps are for those that are listening right now? They're thinking, hey, you know what? I love this full funnel approach, or hey, I need some help potentially with a creative process and just the execution of great creative. What do you think some of the next steps are? And the reason I ask this question, because there's thousands listening to this recording right now, and everybody's in a different kind of entrepreneurial space and journey and complexity. And so I just want to make sure that, you're aligning the services that you have available to, the right teams or brands and kind of like you could really help move the needle for them. So I'll throw it back to you. What do you believe some of the next steps could be?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the values that we bring as an agency, and I think inherently agencies in general do, is we see a lot of brands, a lot of different setups, a lot of different ways to be successful. So, I think sometimes just chatting with an agency on, different perspective and, sometimes if you're working internally at a brand or, a founder, like just getting a different perspective is really important. So I always say that we're best at, pouring gas on a fire that already exists. So if you have some success and you're looking to kind of supercharge that and really scale, that's where we can be most helpful. You've found product market fit and you're looking to pour more fire or more gas on that fire is really where we are. So, if you found a little bit of success with paid ads and you're looking to take it to the next level, we'd love to do an audit and kind of help you understand where we think we can make a difference. And if nothing else, give you a little bit of the perspective on, what else to try and things like that. Sometimes we say, we do an audit and we're like, hey, I think you're heading down the right path and maybe tweak this or this, but continue on that. Or sometimes it's, change these 4 things and we're really off and running. So, if you think you've got a little spark and you're looking to pour some more gas on it, we'd love to take a look under the hood and help out.
Yeah, this is amazing. I'll make sure I put this in the show notes, a link to how you can get an audit, and that, you ask a few kind of simple questions about your current kind of monthly media spend, and then some ideas about like what sort of areas and services do you think you may need help with, if it's creative or paid, and UGC, and even going down the Amazon road and getting into the channels outside of your own channels. So it's pretty cool. You have a lot of great services available here, and I think just having the intentional space and time to look, like, you can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. And so at least you can kind of say, hey, you know what, we're willing to spend 15 minutes to learn about your current business, your current operations. And, if you already have product market fit and are making some money, but you're not sure if you're fully optimized for everything, then I think it's worth having a quick chit chat with Bobby and his team, or Zach and his team, I guess, co-founder. He's more the operating officer for the business, but this is cool. I've learned a ton. I'm on page 2 of notes. So it's a good recording. When you have lots of notes here, I want to thank you, number one, for coming on the show and kind of just sharing your process. And I wish you continued success in the Shopify ecosystem and helping brands. I think it's a great timing right now. I know we're in the summer months right now, but people are really thinking about Q4 and BFCM and the holiday time. I know it's kind of weird to think about it now because it's hot and summery, but I think brands that are listening to this episode right now, I think, there's still great time. Timing is still good right now to potentially engage with Bobby and his team, because you never know. You don't know what you don't know. It's worth a quick audit to check and see. And then, your team can still jump in there and help and plan for this Q4 kind of opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. Have yourself a great afternoon.
You as well.
All right. Take care. Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.